Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the National Network for Youth and the Voices of Youth Count at Chapin Hall's presentation on Voices of Youth Count's Missed Opportunities, Policy and Practice Opportunities. This is Eric Maston, Director of Public Policy with the National Network for Youth, and we'll be kicking off here in one moment. Would like to note for folks that we will be recording this presentation and that currently all attendees are in listen-only mode. We will later have a time for Q&A. At that point, we will go ahead and unmute lines. If folks have any questions or immediate feedback during the event, please use the chat box for those of you joining us online to go ahead and make sure that those questions or any issues with the presentation are seen by presenters. With that, a bit of housekeeping out of the way, I'll go ahead and, as I said, this is Eric Maston, the Director of Public Policy with the National Network for Youth. The National Network for Youth is the oldest national membership nonprofit organization focused on youth and young adult homelessness. We have many of our members joining us today, and we're grateful for you to do so, along with many of our partners and organizations from our friends throughout the movement that touch on youth and young adult homelessness. We're really excited today to be joined by Dr. Matt Morton, the Principal Investigator with the Chapin Hall's Voices of Youth Count initiative. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Matt because he has a lot to talk about on the really amazing findings from this first-of-its-kind study. And we at the network were very excited. We, with our members and partners, advocated very heavily in favor of including the requirements for conducting a national study on incidence and prevalence during the last reauthorization of the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act. And with our partnerships and our friends and allies throughout the movement, we're really pleased to ensure that funding was finally made available, a part of which, for that prevalence study, a part of which went to Chapin Hall and Voices of Youth Count to inform their work that Matt is going to talk about here today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Morton. And Matt, we are having some trouble hearing you if you are speaking right now.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, Matt, we can hear you now.
All right, great. Thanks so much. Sorry about that. So hello, everybody. Thank you very much, and thank you to the National Network for Youth for this opportunity to share our findings from the first release of Voices of Youth Count. Just on a personal note, I've been involved with the National Network for Youth since I was 15 years old. I joined my first National Network for Youth symposium at that time, and I joined the Policy Council when I was 16 or 17. And so every opportunity I have to be part of this group feels like a homecoming to me. So I just want to thank you for this opportunity and for the role that the network has played in my own personal development along the years. And I started in youth homelessness as a young person with lived experience and pretty difficult household adversity growing up. But I was lucky. I had some runaway episodes, but I also had the right people and programs that came into my life at the right time. And one of those was the National Network for Youth member organization at the time. And it changed my life. And at the same time, I know that many other young people are not so lucky. They don't have access to those supports and services when they need them. And not only are they unlucky, but they are often invisible. And I got into research because I believed that my personal best opportunity was to make these young people visible, to elevate the solutions around changing the outcomes for this population and ultimately ending youth homelessness was through better evidence and data. And so Voices of Youth Count has been an excellent opportunity for me and my terrific team and our partners to work together to build stronger evidence, to strengthen the narrative and the need to end youth homelessness for good. So that's what I'm going to speak to today. And I want to recognize that Voices of Youth Count is a very special collaborative initiative. It's the most comprehensive national policy research initiative to date on youth homelessness. I know many of you on the line have probably been waiting decades or longer for this type of work and have advocated for it. And so I'm delighted that we have this special moment to start sharing the fruits of your advocacy and our collective research together. We had a number of private foundations who worked with us to get the initial funding together, and Chapin Hall put in significant resources of its own at the outset. And ultimately, Congress did appropriate funds, as Eric refers to, and HUD became a formal federal funding partner at that time as well. So this has been a terrific public-private partnership. In addition to that, we have 22 communities across the country that have been part of this journey with us. These counties were randomly selected, and they have engaged in youth-inclusive point-in-time counts, as well as youth surveys and assessments of their provider landscape. And in 5 of these communities, the ones indicated in blue, we had in-depth interviews with over 200 young people going deep into their experiences of homelessness and their trajectories, as well as their experiences with engaging systems and services. So we're tremendously grateful to the partnership that we have had with this terrific array of communities. And I also just want to note that this is, as I've mentioned, a multi-component research initiative. It's involved counts, it's involved surveys, interviews. We are completing the most comprehensive evidence review of programs and practices to date for youth homelessness. So the intention here is that we can draw on multiple different methods to tell a fuller story around youth homelessness. And out of these various research components, we have multiple what we call research to impact briefs that are coming out of this work. So this is not your typical research initiative where we just drop one 300 or 400 page report and then call it a day. The intention is to use this very rich and diverse body of evidence to tell a story over time. And so the future briefs will include these range of topics that are up on the screen right now and allow us to go deeper into different aspects of youth homelessness, drawing on our different research methods. But today, I'm going to start with what was just released, and that was the first of a series of research to impact briefs. And it focuses on the size and dimensions of youth homelessness in America. So specifically, the products that we released were a brief called Missed Opportunities, and it's available on our website, as well as a one-pager. And for those of you that are interested in the more geekier material, like I am, we have published an academic paper with these findings in the Journal of Adolescent Health, and that's available open access, so anybody can access that article free of charge online. And today I'm going to focus on the methodology, the findings, and the implications of this particular work. So the graph that I put up here is just to summarize a little bit of the challenge that we have when we're trying to arrive at reliable national estimates of youth homelessness. I don't need to tell you that youth homelessness is dynamic. It's often difficult to capture. It's fluid. And so for all of these reasons, it is particularly difficult to capture the true scope and size of youth homelessness in America. And this graph provides one kind of simple illustration of that challenge. I think often in youth homelessness and in homelessness in general, we rely on things like point-in-time counts, which are essentially street or shelter-based counts, and we rely on systems data, which ultimately relies on identification systems or reporting systems to capture the size of the population facing youth homelessness. It's not just in youth homelessness, but in most fields, whether it's domestic violence or mental health, that formal reporting or visible identification of homelessness only captures that top of the iceberg in most cases. And so what we wanted to do was to complement those methods that are out there. They have a role, they have a purpose, they're very important, but to try to get under the water and to better understand how big is the bottom of the iceberg of youth homelessness, what's missing, what's hidden beneath the surface. At the same time, when you try to do that, when you cast a wider net, when you use the more representative survey, there's also a risk of including young people in the water, so to speak. Those are young people who would be considered inclusion errors if you include in their estimates. In other words, they're young people who don't really match the experience of homelessness that you're trying to capture, or whatever phenomenon it is. So the challenge of what we're trying to do here, and the reason why we've gone with a nationally representative survey approach like the legislation calls for, is because we really want to maximize A and B, the full iceberg, and at the same time take measures to reduce the likelihood that we're capturing young people in the water, the so-called inclusion errors. So these are a few basic points on the approach that we've taken. We've partnered on the national survey approach with Gallup. In particular, it's U.S. Politics and Economics Daily Tracking Survey. It's a survey that it does with 500 people every single day. And we added a youth homelessness module to that survey and for many months. And ultimately ended up with a quite large sample size, over 26,000 people. And this is a phone-based survey, which has strengths and limitations, but overall is we believe, a much stronger way to capture the hiddenness of youth homelessness, and it relies on cell phones as well as landlines and random samples. And we take both youth reports and household reports on young people over the last year. And we've added, as I said, a module, a brief module on homelessness experiences. So this is not the in-depth portion of our work. That's with our qualitative work. This is to help us capture the size and dimensions of youth homelessness. And just a few other points here is that one is that we capture homelessness in an inclusive way and really trying to rely on the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act definition of homelessness, which is not specific to where you sleep so much as the conditions. It's about lacking a safe and alternative living arrangement. And so we capture any experiences of homelessness as defined by the respondents over a one-year period for at least a night, any couch surfing in which a young person was moving from one temporary arrangement to another while lacking an alternative living arrangement. And for minors, we capture experiences of having run away or been asked to leave and having been away for at least a night. Now, two other important terms here. One is that we capture 12-month prevalence. So we're not capturing homelessness today. We're capturing how much experience of homelessness there was over a 12-month period. We think that's appropriate given the fluidity of homelessness. At the same time, we also capture incidence, which is the rate of new cases of homelessness in a 12-month period. For 18 to 25-year-olds, we capture self-reports of homelessness as well as household reports. For 13 to 17-year-olds, we only have reports from adults in the household about the experiences of minors. So that's one of the limitations of this approach, and one we'd like to correct in the future. But for that reason, the estimates that I'll present to you on minors, we suggest are likely conservative estimates of youth homelessness for that population. So the last thing I'll say is that we compared our national survey data to the U.S. Census. And what this table shows is that overall they're very well balanced. In other words, the national survey sample looks a lot like the demographics of the nation. So we feel pretty confident that this is a nationally representative sample. And for more details, you're welcome to pull up the journal article on the strengths and limitations and the methods of the survey. So to the findings. The first finding of 5 that I'm going to highlight is that youth homelessness is a broad and hidden challenge. Indeed, we find that about 1 in 30 adolescent minors ages 13 to 17 experience some form of homelessness over a 1-year period. When we look at the prevalence for young adults ages 18 to 25, the rates climb even higher to about 1 in 10 young adults experiencing some form of homelessness over a 12-month period. About half of those were explicitly reported homelessness, and about the other half were experiences that the respondent described as couch surfing only. So you get a sense of the range of experiences included here. So these are big numbers, and I just want to pause for a second and to sort of unpack those a little bit and try to make sense of these. And I know that for some of you, these are not necessarily big numbers. In fact, when we did a poll before the estimates came out, many people expected even higher prevalence rates than these because of your day-to-day experience and what you see in the field. But nonetheless, for many people, these are larger estimates than we've ever seen before. And so they take some explaining. First of all, I think it's important to reinforce that we are capturing hidden experiences that we don't get in previous counts, especially couch surfing and doubling up types of experiences, but even street-based homelessness or a young person who's sleeping in a car or not contacting a shelter or just otherwise disconnected from the system. These are young people who make up a big share of those experiencing homelessness and that we can capture because we have a population-based survey. Also, because we have a 12-month period, we can capture that fluidity of homelessness. So a young person might not have been homeless last night, but might be tonight. And those, we know that young people come in and out of homelessness experiences in between different sleeping arrangements. So a 1-year prevalence estimate is going to capture that scale. Second is no matter what definitions you use, no matter what measures you use, which is why everybody wants to focus on. Lots of people think, well, it's because you had this definition or that parameter, and that's part of the story. But when we've looked back on previous surveys at different parts of homelessness, whenever there was a population-based survey with a whole school or a whole state or a whole community or the country, the estimates are always larger than what we get with systems data or reporting data. And fourth, previous studies have shown prevalence among younger adults to be higher than among older adults. So that's something that I don't think we always appreciate, but the estimates are partly high because we're capturing among a young population who are entering a transitional stage of life. And on top of that, young adults are getting hammered by this economy and the housing market with incredibly steep housing prices, especially in the labor markets where young people need to be most. At the same time, we have stagnated wages. You put on top of that, that census data show that young adults have the highest household poverty rates in the country. That 50% of 25-year-olds still live with their parents. And then you add on top of that that many young people just don't have safe and stable families to rely on as a safety net. Well, given that backdrop, It's certainly alarming, it's staggering, but it's not necessarily surprising that we would see estimates as high as 1 in 10 young people experiencing some form of homelessness in a year in America. Our second finding is that youth homelessness involves diverse experiences and circumstances. So there's no one-size-fits-all solution for young people. As these data show, and we show in our report, you've got young people with a wide range of numbers of episodes in a 12-month period with length of episodes. Some young people who are couch surfing and feeling safe in that arrangement, and that could have been a good safety net for them. Other young people, for example, might be couch surfing in a very exploitative and unsafe arrangement and might need additional respite, shelter, or care. And a reasonable share of young people said that they were either still homeless or unstably housed at the time that we interviewed them. So these are based on a smaller sample of follow-up interviews, but I think the overarching point that we make here is that a tailored response to individual youth needs is really appropriate. The third finding is that prevention and early intervention are essential. And there are a couple data points I want to point out as fodder for this, or ammunition for you to use in your communities. First is that, like I said earlier, we look at incidence as well as prevalence. So prevalence is how common is a problem in society. In our case, what percentage of youth experience homelessness in a year? Incidence asks, what was the rate of new cases of homelessness over a one-year period? And we found that about half of the youth who experienced some form of homelessness over a year faced homelessness for the first time in their lives. In other words, we could take every young person off the street or out of a couch tomorrow, and next year we would expect about half as many to be experiencing homelessness again. We simply cannot end youth homelessness without a stronger upstream response. And in other countries like in Australia, the UK, Canada, we see much more explicit policy frameworks on prevention and early intervention of youth homelessness. And in the US, we just haven't really reached that type of policy framework as a nation yet. So we hope that these data can reinforce that. And in addition to the need for prevention and early intervention highlighted by the incidence rate, we also highlight system entry points that many of you are aware of, but that now we have national data for. For example, across our 22 counties, when we were surveying youth experiencing homelessness, 29% had ever been in foster care, which is staggering when you consider that only about 2% of the general youth population have been in foster care. Almost half of the youth had ever been in detention, prison, or jail, and that's not even counting probation or other court contacts or arrests. And a third of young people who are experiencing homelessness, young adults, ages 18 to 25, lacked a high school diploma or GED. So here alone, we have 3 major public systems with vulnerable youth in their care who could play a much more concerted role in early intervention and prevention by identification service supports for these young people so that they don't have to experience homelessness. Our fourth finding is unique because in the past, we have not had nationally representative data on that allows us to look at homelessness across different areas of the country or different types of communities, in particular rural communities. I've sat on multiple research panels where questions were asked about what do we know about rural youth homelessness, and some of the top researchers in our countries have consistently said not much. And I'm pleased that Voices of Youth Count has given us this opportunity as a field to look more closely. At a starting point, we find that youth homelessness affects rural youth at similar levels. When you look at prevalence rates, the prevalence of youth homelessness in rural communities is almost the same as it is in urban or more suburban communities. Now, there are still more human beings that live in urban communities in the United States. So as a number, you would have a higher number of youth experiencing homelessness in those areas. But as a share of the population, as a percentage, this is a challenge that really affects rural-urban communities similarly. This is not an East Coast, West Coast challenge. It's not an inner-city challenge. It's an American challenge that we have young people experiencing homelessness across the country. And even if we break down the data by further gradients, looking at population density by the lowest, most dense 20% down to the least dense 20%, you get a little bit more variation, but the overall story remains very much the same. This is a national challenge. That being said, rural and non-rural youth homelessness can look different in terms of its composition. And here again, I'm referring to our 22 counties where we did surveys, not the phone-based survey. And we found that rural youth are about twice as likely to be staying with others, largely couch surfing, and about half as likely to be sheltered as those in higher population counties. And you can see that with the small counties bar at the bottom, where you have 39% unstably housed or staying with others. So this reinforces that rural youth homelessness is much more hidden and involves tailored responses for a less visible population over a wider terrain with less service infrastructure. And our fifth finding that I'll finish with is that some youth are at greater risk of homelessness than others. In particular, youth of color, Black youth, and Hispanic youth have a substantially higher risk of having reported homelessness than their peers. Unmarried parenting youth, but really just parenting youth in general, doesn't change a lot if we take out the married condition. But parenting youth have about a 200% increased risk of experiencing homelessness over and above their non-parenting peers. LGBT youth had 120% increased risk of experiencing homelessness compared to their non-LGBT identifying peers. And the strongest risk correlate that we found among those that we measured was education, and in particular, the lack of a high school diploma or GED. These young people had 4.5 times the risk of experiencing homelessness compared to young adults who had completed at least a high school education. So it's clearly a substantial risk factor and opportunity for intervention. And this graph just shows these findings in a slightly different way. It's what we call a forest plot, and here we show a broader range of variables. But again, the diamonds that are in orange signify factors that are significantly correlated with higher risk of homelessness, except the Asian youth who are at lower risk of reporting homelessness. But one of the things we find is that once we start interacting variables, for example, youth who are Asian and parenting have a substantially higher risk of experiencing homelessness. So when we start to look under the hood, we get a more nuanced story. And the other thing that we find is that multiple risk factors equates to cumulative risk. So if you're Black and you happen to be LGBT, you have a substantially higher risk of experiencing homelessness than either one of those subgroups alone. The other finding here is that, or the point that I want to make here is that a lot of this is known to you working in these systems and based on the data. One that I think stands a little bit differently from what we have in other data is the Hispanic youth population. So we find that almost a third of the young adults who experience homelessness identified as Hispanic, compared to about a quarter of the young adult population in the U.S. So an overrepresentation. But when you look at other data, including VoYC's own point-in-time counts, but also HUD's point-in-time counts, and when you look at FISB shelter data or HUD shelter data, it's actually the same. About 19% of those shelter populations were Hispanic. So this implies an overrepresentation among Hispanic youth, but also a hiddenness that we don't capture with the same degree with other populations. So worth a conversation in the field about this. So we have a series of recommendations. I won't go through each of them right now, and I'm eager to hear what Eric's reflections are. But as a starting point, we're really reinforcing that this was meant as a first national estimate. It can be improved and enhanced in certain ways, but we've shown that a national estimate could be done replicably and cost efficiently. And we simply cannot end youth homelessness in the dark. So we're making an argument for repeated and enhanced national estimates over time of youth homelessness, as well as a stronger focus on prevention and early intervention. This really takes all of us, and tailored interventions for young people experiencing homelessness. And I want to kind of close on this message, which is for us important from a framing perspective. And I'd encourage for a lot of you, as you're talking with people locally about these data and your own data, is to frame this up in the bigger picture. This is about we, not about them. This is about a positive message about what we can do together if we end youth homelessness. And what we know from loads of brain science is that adolescence and young adulthood represent a key developmental window in young people's lives. And every day of housing instability represents missed opportunity to support their healthy development, but also their capacity to contribute to stronger local communities and local economies. And we all lose out in these missed opportunities if we don't intervene at the right place, at the right time, in the right way. So I thank you so much. I want to thank the network again for this opportunity. I want to encourage everyone to help spread the word. We've been waiting decades for this moment to use evidence. I just want to say we've had a lot of great media traction. NPR, Washington Post, Newsweek, lots of groups have picked this up. And I want to encourage you to use us, use it, ride that wave to tell your local story, tell people, the media, local elected officials about your work, link it up to this national story, and help get the word out. So thank you so much, and I look forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Really appreciate that overview. I know that there are a few questions that we received, and we'll go ahead and tackle those during Q&A at the end. But I wanted to, as Matt noted, sort of talk a bit about the network perspective and what we see as some of the policy and practice opportunities that really are called out and highlighted based on sort of our look at the findings and recommendations from missed opportunities. And for those of you who are familiar with the network and our policy work, many of these may sound like things that we've been a part of and have been ongoing from the network for some time. I think one of the first things that, before I dig into some of our specific policy opportunities, is that we're really struck by the overall size and numbers that are presented in the findings of missed opportunities. We've always known that many, as Matt said, of the measures that are out there don't really give us the full sense of what youth and young adult homelessness looks like, both in terms of numbers and how it occurs. So we think that this is really an exciting time to be able to dive deeper into that and really have, from the strength of Chapin Hall and their expertise, a real sense of something that will help advocates and practitioners to tackle this from a policy and practice perspective at the federal, state, and local levels. So a bit about some of the policy opportunities that we at the network will be continuing to work on as we move forward and are thinking critically about how the findings and recommendations from missed opportunities can inform some of the work that is already happening on a policy and practice arena. First and foremost is there are probably 4 key policy areas that the network will be continuing to focus on and that we think really are highlighted as policy opportunities by the findings of Voices of Youth Count. That includes reauthorizing the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, passing the Homeless Children and Youth Act, ensuring federal funding for youth and young adult homelessness programs, and strengthening the federal responses to youth and young adult homelessness, and that being slightly distinct from funding in that we're really thinking about how systems can collaborate. Matt talked about that, especially in looking from the findings at where you've had experiences with multiple systems, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we see opportunities for systems to collaborate more. So first, the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act. As all of our runaway and homeless youth providers on this call know, and as many of you know and appreciate, the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, which was originally passed 43 years ago as part of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, really provides the foundational support for communities to serve and respond to youth and young adult homelessness outside of other systems that youth might be engaged with. Originally, we were looking at alternatives to incarceration, and that is still, as the findings note, a very significant area where youth who experience homelessness intersect with the justice system, both before they become homeless and also while or after they have experienced homelessness. And also an opportunity for youth who are maybe not able to be adjudicated into their local child welfare system, or youth who run away from foster placement. So the Runaway and Homeless Youth and Trafficking Prevention Act will reauthorize the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, making sure that we continue to have the foundational framework there that allows programs throughout the country in urban, suburban, and rural communities to address homelessness and to serve youth and young adults and their families throughout the country and in their communities. The legislation includes some updates to enable programs to better serve youth. It also, as the name indicates, works to address youth who have experienced trafficking. And while VoYC did not specifically look at trafficking, we know from other research that is out there, including some recent reports from Covenant House International, about the really disparate impact of homelessness on victims of trafficking, and as well on the vulnerability of homeless youth to experience and become victims of trafficking. RHY-TPA will soon be introduced in both the House and the Senate, and we look forward to advancing it as quickly as possible. The Homeless Children and Youth Act would provide amendments to the McKinney-Vento homeless assistance programs and the McKinney-Vento Act to enable responses from communities to different forms of homelessness. As Matt discussed, one of the key things that we have known and the missed opportunities highlighted was that homelessness looks different for youth at different points, even within a 12-month span. And we know that it looks different for them over a course of their entire lifetime, from adolescence through early adulthood. The current version of HCYA provides flexibility for local communities to meet their needs, really making sure that communities are able to develop and utilize responses that are most effective throughout the entirety of children, youth, and families that they are serving and that they see a need to serve in their community. The legislation has been introduced, and it has bipartisan sponsors in both the House and the Senate. Federal funding is clearly one of those key areas that we see as being one of those important areas for the federal government to support efforts to address youth and young adult homelessness. As many of you as providers know, federal funding directly to support programs can be only a drop in the bucket, but it is critical in that it allows you to leverage that funding to scale up and to secure other funding from state and local partners, from philanthropy, and from private foundations. The Runaway and Homeless Youth Act provides for currently $119.12 million for programs around the country, and was last authorized at $165 million. And that authorization level will stay the same in the next version of RHY-TPA when it's reauthorized. That's our goal, to make sure that it stays at that same level, even though we know that it is a small amount that can serve and is necessary to serve youth who are experiencing homelessness. The Education for Homeless Children and Youth Act is another key program that provides supports directly to educators and to schools to help support youth and families who are at risk of or experiencing homelessness. And that was recently, the authorization amount increased to $85 million. It's currently funded at $77 million. And of course, there is other funding and policies throughout the government that support efforts to prevent and respond to youth and young adult homelessness. This is just an example of some of the funding that helps to either directly support or to help coordinate and collaborate on efforts to address, prevent, and respond to youth homelessness. Includes the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program, a second round of grants, which we anticipate will soon be announced, run through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, helps communities to come together to strengthen their responses to youth and, in particular, young adult homelessness. There's been language in report bills around third-party documentation to help address some of the challenges that we've heard from youth and providers that youth have experienced in the past. And of course, the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness has been a great champion at bringing together partners and stakeholders from throughout the federal government to look at homelessness generally, and most specifically, youth and young adult homelessness. And these are just an example of some of the other programs and funding streams that support youth. I could go on all day about how youth can access programs through the Department of Labor, through other health and human services programs. But we see these as being some of the core opportunities for leveraging federal funding to prevent and respond to youth and young adult homelessness. In terms of administrative policy, it's an area that the network has worked on for some time. Those of you who have attended our National Summit on Youth Homelessness know that we bring together every year representatives from 6 key federal agencies to talk about how they're responding to and working collaboratively to address youth and young adult homelessness. And as the findings from missed opportunities call out, there's a real opportunity to strengthen at the federal, state, and local level collaborations between systems. The network and our partners are looking at those opportunities, especially to encourage collaboration with the child welfare system. Many of you know that RHY programs and child welfare are overseen by 2 separate bureaus within the same administration at HHS. So we're really looking at opportunities to, within HHS, strengthen that collaboration and filter that down so that communities are able to build partnerships to effectively serve youth when they're experiencing homelessness, to make sure that a youth does not run away from foster care, or to ensure that a youth who comes into an RHY provider is connected, when appropriate, to a child welfare agency to receive the services and supports through that local child welfare agency that might be appropriate for them. The juvenile justice system is another area where, as Matt noted, there's a large crossover and a long opportunity for collaboration. The Department of Justice has been quite engaged on this at the national level in the past, and the network is really pleased to be continuing our efforts with the Coalition for Juvenile Justice and the National League of Cities to look at recommendations and practice where juvenile justice can help to both head off and appropriately respond to youth who they encounter that are experiencing homelessness. And throughout all of, as well as the Department of Education as a key opportunity, the Department of Education has really been a leader on tackling issues that youth have that could lead to homelessness or in responding when it occurs. Really throughout what the network has been doing and what we see as a real opportunity and a real need that Missed Opportunities calls attention to is making sure that throughout the federal government and that throughout our local and state work, that systems are really coming together to improve access for youth and young adults, because we know that youth experience homelessness in so many different forms and that they interface with so many different systems as they move through their daily lives, but especially in their homelessness experience connections. In terms of practice opportunities, and these are areas that the network and many others throughout the country have been working on and engaging in, figuring out how to strengthen systems. First is that general community collaborative efforts. Many communities we've been hearing have been looking at ways that they can come together and bring together those diverse stakeholders, those diverse systems at the local level. We've had communities that have reached out to the network as they've looked at utilizing the proposed system to end youth and young adult homelessness the network published in 2016 to bring together their communities. And many of those same communities have been using that as a starting point to then look at bringing together the necessary stakeholders to participate in a 100-day challenge or to apply for Youth Homelessness Demonstration Project grants. Communities have also been, and we have been publishing some information on how Housing First for Youth can really be incorporated into communities' responses for preventing and responding to, especially responding to youth homelessness. We know that Housing First for Youth probably looks a little different. And we know this is an area that communities are trying to really get a handle on. So we want to make sure that there's an opportunity there to have conversations about ensuring responses are in the best way possible for youth who are experiencing homelessness. And then coordinated entry systems. And we know that many of you in the field have been having conversations as you've looked at rolling out coordinated entry for how to make sure that it is responsive to the needs and the experiences of youth and young adults and families as well, because we've heard that there are differences in how communities have approached coordinated entry, and we really want to make sure to highlight where those have been successes to really make sure that youth are getting the services that they need, because they do constitute such a unique population. So with that, that concludes our part of sort of our current analysis on views and opportunities. I'm not going to go too deep into the weeds on some of how policy might play out. But at this juncture, we want to go ahead and tackle some of the questions that we have received. If you have questions, if you're online, please go ahead and submit them in through the box on the side, and we will go ahead and take those on. I did notice a couple of questions come in that I will tackle as at the outset, which are relating to presentation materials. As I said at the outset, we are recording this presentation, and we'll go ahead and circulate a link to the recording afterwards. So, Matt, we have a couple of questions here for you. I don't know if you can see the questions that have come in through here.
I can't see them, so I'm counting on you, Eric.
Sure, I'll just go ahead and take care of these. We have a few questions on distinct populations. So one question from Eric is, when you delve into racial and ethnic disparities, can you speak to the overrepresentation of American Indian youth? Our largest disparities in homelessness in Minnesota are among American Indian youth.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Eric. Thanks for raising it, and really important. So the challenge here is with a nationally representative survey, you might have subpopulations that are very important in some parts of the country, but in a national survey involve very small sample sizes. And that's the case with American Indian tribal communities. So we haven't yet presented results on that subpopulation because our sample sizes are very small. The trend is towards a higher risk of homelessness, as we would all expect with that population. But we have to look at the data a little bit more closely because, in the overall survey, we want to be able to present results with statistical confidence if we're going to put them out there. But that is a population we'd like to continue to do more investigation into, both with the data that we have and with future work. Eric, you might be on mute.
You're right, I was. Thank you, Matt. We have a couple other questions on other specific populations, and these I think we're looking at, folks are asking about specific numbers. Actually, I'm sorry, one is specific, which is, do we know how many young people were homeless, who were homeless also had babies? I know you highlighted the percentage. Does that include a specific number?
Right. So I can't give the number off from the national survey off the top of my head of the actual percentage of young people that experiencing homelessness that had babies. It's a number that we could pull up, so I'll get that. It's just a different way of looking at the data point. What we did with because we have a national survey data, is we can show relative risk compared to those in the general population, and that's not something that we can often do with counts data or systems data easily. So that's why we've presented it as risk percentages rather than as a share of the population. But what I can tell you is, off the top of my head, it's from the 22 counties where we did youth counts. Around 1 in 3 young women experiencing homelessness were pregnant or parenting. And in some communities, it was even higher. And in fact, on average, in the smaller, more rural communities, we had higher rates, upwards of 40 to close to 50% in some cases. So there's a significant implication here. And when we shared these data with several communities, I've had commissioners of children and families almost leaping out of their seat at this finding because they just didn't realize how much of an overlap there was with youth homelessness and this form of family homelessness, and the missed opportunities to connect systems and services to meet both the developmental needs of a young person experiencing homelessness as well as the family needs of a family experiencing homelessness and the early childhood development needs of their babies, so such that we can get in early to prevent intergenerational transmissions of poverty and homelessness. So it's a good question, and I'll try to, in our pregnant and parenting brief, when we publish that one, we'll have many more layers of statistics and qualitative information from our interviews about that population in particular.
Great. Also a question on the relative risk estimates relating to same data as the prevalence estimates. That is, the percentage of youth who are experiencing homelessness that are also youth of, LGBT color, LGBT, parenting. It sounds like you were just a bit about how some of the questions on drilling into that data. But it sounds like there's some more interest in getting some of the disaggregation and also looking at really drilling down on, percentage that are, rather than sort of the questions on risk factor.
Right. So remember, the first release is about the size and dimensions of youth homelessness in America and the correlates with youth homelessness. So this brief is to start the conversation. And what the national survey does is, because this is a brief survey module, it's really well suited to get a lot of data across the country in a very replicable, cost-efficient way. So it's quite strong at capturing national prevalence and the factors that are correlated with youth homelessness. So that's what we've presented. But it's not strong at in-depth insights into the experiences or risks of certain subgroups experiencing homelessness. So for that type of information, we rely much more on the Voices of Youth Count in-depth interviews where we go really deep into the life experiences of youth and how their identity as, say, a young gay, African-American male did or did not play into their trajectory into homelessness, or how they were able to engage services or not. So that's where we capture more of that nuanced information, and it's one of the benefits of a multi-component research initiative. But for the national estimates, what we're really trying to do is start that dialogue by showing that youth homelessness is not equally experienced by all, and some populations are really overrepresented, and they require tailored prevention strategies as well as tailored supports and services once they're experiencing homelessness. So this is to start that dialogue.
Fantastic, thank you. And we're looking forward to continuing to support that and support those efforts and learn more as you continue to move forward. There's a couple of questions in here around sort of policies, case studies, and models. One about specific state and local policies, and a question on model programs. One thing that I would encourage for those who are looking at opportunities to engage at the state and local level, the network has information on our website, including a model state policy for a Runaway and Homeless Youth Act. Would encourage people to take a look at that if your state does not already have one. Includes opportunities to and some recommendations for language that we think is really helpful for states or even local communities as they're looking to strengthen their systems in responding to youth and young adult homelessness and in preventing it. There are a number of states that have put specific Runaway and Homeless Youth Acts into place. Some include funding, some include youth homelessness, designated state personnel to address youth and young adult homelessness. So there's really a lot of opportunities and models out there. I would encourage folks to look at that. I think that the other opportunity really at the local level is to really look at those areas of strengthening collaboration and bringing together stakeholders from the various different systems. That can include stakeholders who often respond to adult homelessness, community providers who focus on domestic violence prevention and response, and government agencies. I had the chance to attend a Chicago convening where the city was bringing together the mayor's office, the Health and Human Services Agency at the city level, the Child Welfare Agency at the county level, and they also brought in, for instance, the juvenile court judges and the sheriff and the prosecutor's office, because they really saw that opportunity to connect with the justice system to make sure that there was a shared understanding of the issues that the community was facing. Other questions from folks? I'm looking here. We have some more. Of others. Do we have anything in the chat box? So there's one here regarding to juvenile justice about do youth and adults, emerging adults leaving the systems who are not able to go home, how do they get information about different programs and funding? Really there's that I think speaks to the need to collaborate at the local systems. The network is working, as I mentioned, on the Collaborating for Change program, and we'll be looking at pushing out some additional information about ways to strengthen responses there.
Can I just say this is another opportunity to use data to convene. We have all these community partners, and we've been doing local releases as well as national releases. And I was in one community just a couple months ago where we shared, just a simple data point of the percentage of youth in that community that had been in juvenile detention, prison, or jail. And there was this coordinated task force, and they looked around the room and realized there was nobody from law enforcement, nobody from juvenile justice or the criminal adult justice system. And the next time I came back for a meeting, that was different. There were people at the table. So I think even as a simple starting point, just using evidence to bring the right stakeholders to the table and have a local conversation about what you can do is one way that can be a great way to use the information you have available or the data through VoYC's.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I think that holds true regardless of the systems and agencies that you're looking to engage with. We have another question here specific to bringing awareness to schools and the community, and I think that, again, as you said, using this data is a good way to highlight the issue and the impact. And specific to the education question, I would be remiss if I did not call out Schoolhouse Connection, who's also been kind enough to help facilitate with their full GoToWebinar system this call. They're a fantastic resource on how education communities and individual educators can help raise awareness and bring attention to this issue. We have one more question that I'm going to go ahead and address and be respectful of folks' time since we are running out of time here, which is some agencies are using couch surfing as a diversion from shelter. And how do we feel about that? I'm not sure if this question is specific to child welfare agencies using shelter or using couch surfing. We've certainly heard a number of cases where child welfare agencies do not have a sufficient number of foster placements. They do not have a large-scale facility. Really, the safest place for a youth to be is going to be at a home or somewhere where they have full supports and services available to them. Whether that's if they're engaged with the foster system, making sure that they have a foster placement, not sleeping on their case manager's office floor or the lounge in the local agency's offices before they head back to school in the morning. There are a number of unique models that RHY providers are using throughout the country, including host homes. But really the best way is to make sure that those are a part of an integrated system, not simply encouraging a youth to find whatever they can. Well, thank you everyone very much. We are at 4 o'clock. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. Matt, any closing words?
I just appreciate this opportunity. We look forward to engaging the network and its membership through the continued rollout over the year ahead. And thank you for your partnership, and thank you also to Schoolhouse Connection for providing this platform today.
Great. Thank you very much, Matt. We really appreciate all of your work in raising attention and really helping us to learn more about the incidence and prevalence, to identify where these missed opportunities are, and we look forward to working with you and Chapin Hall over the coming year and beyond to drill down into this more, to continue to improve our understanding. Thank you to Schoolhouse Connection, again, for the use of this platform. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. Please visit nnforyouth.org for more information. Sign up for our website. VoYCesofYouthCount.org is the website for Missed Opportunities, the Voices of Youth Count initiative, and you can get more information there as well, specific to missed opportunities and the Voices of Youth Count initiative as a whole. Thank you, everyone, very much. Have a wonderful afternoon.